Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Model Kit Review. In today's fun model kit review video, we'll be looking at the 1/48 scale Special Hobby Reggiane Re.2000 Series 1. This kit was originally released in 2020, so it's a relatively new kit, and it is Special Hobby kit number SH48204. In this video, I'll give a brief history of the RE2000. We'll go through the kit instructions, and we'll talk about any problem areas to watch out for during the construction phase of the build. We'll look at the detailing on the small parts that make up the landing gear and the engine and the interior of the kit. We'll look at the exterior surface detailing, and we'll talk about the fit of the major parts of the kit. We'll take a look at the clear parts, and we'll talk about the fit and the clarity of those. We'll also look at the marking options that are included in the kit, and we'll talk about the quality of the decals themselves. And finally, I'll give my conclusions at the end, and I'll give my recommendations on what skill levels this model is appropriate for. If you like in-depth model kit reviews and model building technique videos, please consider becoming a member. Depending on the level of membership, members get perks like early access to new videos, bonus content, etc. Your support is very much appreciated, and it will help me to continue to make great model making content on this channel. A brief history of the Reggiane Re.2000. The Reggiane Re.2000 was a World War II era Italian single-seat fighter aircraft. The Re.2000 was designed by Robert Longhi, who was previously employed by Sikorsky, and he used his experience at Sikorsky to design an aircraft which bore more than a striking resemblance to the Sikorsky P-35. Similarities included the 5-spar wing with integral fuel tanks. The first prototype Re.2000 flew for the first time on May 24, 1939. In August, it underwent comparative flight trials with 2 other Italian fighter designs and a German Bf-109E. Reportedly, the Re.2000 exhibited excellent maneuverability. However, its wing with the unsealed integral fuel tanks was clearly prone to fatal combat damage. It was also prone to leaking, and the wing itself was a weak point of the Re.2000 throughout its production run. The Re.2000 served with several different countries throughout World War II. In Sweden, the Re.2000 was known as the J-20, and it was used as an interceptor guarding Swedish neutrality throughout the long war years. Italian Re.2000s were mainly deployed in convoy escort missions around the island of Sicily, and they took part in the attacks against Malta as well. Hungarian Re.2000s were used on the Eastern Front, where they faced Soviet opposition. The Re.2000 was powered by a Piaggio P11 RC40 14-cylinder air-cooled radial engine. This engine was rated at 986 horsepower at 13,000 feet. Top speed on the Re.2000 was 330 miles an hour at 17,400 feet. Armament on the Re.2000 consisted of 2 12.7mm or 50 caliber Breda machine guns. These were located in the upper engine cowling. Looking at what comes in the box, there are 4 sprues of plastic parts and 1 sprue of clear parts, as well as a nicely printed instruction booklet that has full color views for the marking options. Looking at the instructions, these are broken down into very simple steps. The first 12 steps deal with the construction of the cockpit assembly. This is very detailed, it's quite parts heavy, and unfortunately, once this is all completed and put into the kit, there's only a very small opening where you can see into the cockpit interior. So I think much of this cockpit detail is going to go unseen. Looking at some of the interior detail bits, the parts themselves actually look very nice. You will have to do some minor cleanup on each of the parts, and you'll want to carefully test fit all of the parts. I have recently built the Special Hobby Reggiane Re.2005 that was produced in this same time period. So I speak from experience when I say most of these small parts are going to require cleanup and careful dry fitting before committing to assembly. In steps 14 and 15, we're building the tail wheel assembly. I don't really anticipate any problems here, but again, dry fitting is the order of the day. In step 16, we are closing up the fuselage assembly around the cockpit assembly and around the tail wheel assembly. In step 17, we are installing the landing gear mounts and the wheel wells to the lower wing. In steps 18A and B, we're starting construction on the main landing gear. And in steps 19 and 20, we're assembling the wheels and we're completing the main landing gear assemblies. I don't anticipate any major problems here, but again, we have lots of small parts and each one is going to require a little bit of special attention to make sure that everything fits properly. In step 21, we're starting to assemble the push rods for the engine, and in step 22, we're gluing together the 2 rows of the radial engine. The detail on these parts looks great, and there is an extra diagram at the top of page 5 that shows how the push rods should be located on the completed engine. In step 23, we're attaching the upper wings to the fuselage halves, and we're attaching the lower wings to the fuselage assembly. In setting these parts together, I anticipate a lot of careful dry fitting to try to get the best fit possible between the wings and the fuselage. Even with careful dry fitting, I think you're going to need a little bit of putty between the wings and the fuselage. Looking at the underside seam, this is a little bit worse than the upper side seam, and it will definitely need some careful attention. In step 24, we're attaching the engine to the front of the airframe. The engine parts themselves are very well detailed, and I think this will look great on the finished kit. In step 25, we're building the engine cowl assembly, and in step 26, we're attaching that to the airframe. I spent a lot of time dry fitting the engine cowl assembly and carefully gluing it together. It still needs some attention, and I do have a couple of places where I've got sink marks and I'll need to use some putty. The fit of the engine cowl to the airframe will also take a little bit more tweaking. In step 27, we're attaching the elevators to the aircraft, and in step 28, we're building the exhaust for the aircraft. I don't anticipate any major problems here. In steps 29 and 30, we're adding some of these smaller bits to the exterior of the aircraft. And in step 31, we're attaching the main landing gear to the aircraft. You definitely want to take your time on step 31 to make sure you get the alignment correct on all of these parts. In step 32, we're building the pilot's headrest, and in step 33, we're attaching that and the clear parts and the gun sight to the kit. The clear parts themselves look pretty nice. I don't anticipate any major problems with these, although I do anticipate having to carefully dry fit them to the fuselage prior to committing to glue. In step 34, we are building the prop assembly. And in step 35, we're attaching the pitot tube, prop, and landing lights to the kit. Looking at the marking options included with this kit, there are 3 marking options. I really like the 4-view full color diagrams that the marking guides provide for each aircraft. I think that will make painting and decaling these kits a little bit easier. All 3 marking options have the mottled camouflage, and this is a notoriously difficult camouflage scheme to paint. Looking at the decals themselves, they look nice on the backing paper, although when I built the Re.2005 from Special Hobby, I had issues with several of the decals crinkling. They were very sticky, so I had to wet the area where they were going to go, and once they got on the model, they were very difficult to move around. So you want to be very careful as you apply these. Given my experience with the Re.2005, I anticipate a little bit of a difficult decaling session with this one. Looking at the surface detailing on the exterior of the kit, the detail is represented by very finely engraved panel lines. This reminds me of a Hasegawa kit from the 90s. However, the fit is very un-Hasegawa-like, and you'll need to spend a lot of time dry fitting the parts prior to committing to glue. Given the multitude of small parts and the difficulty in the construction phase of the build, in addition to the very difficult paint job that's on this kit, I can only recommend this Special Hobby Re.2000 to experienced modelers who are looking to put something a little bit out of the ordinary on the shelf. Well, I'd love to know what you guys think. If there are any RE2000 fans out there, please let me know in the comment section below. As always, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, model on.